the Ghana cedi will continue
to
see how it can stabilize, but currently it's depreciating against the major international currencies, particularly the US dollar. And we'll be having some discussion with AGI and some relevant industry stakeholders still.
Let's begin with the performance of the cedi against the US dollar. You represent industry. So when the cedi is depreciating, obviously affects the cost of doing business. How are businesses handling this? How is it affecting businesses, first of all?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yes, the cedi depreciation is an issue. There's no doubt about it. Our members talk about it whenever it's depreciating, because a lot of our companies, especially the manufacturing companies, they import raw materials and then you process and sell. By the time you finish selling and paying back the raw materials you imported, if the cedi has depreciated, it means you need so much cedi for the same amount of dollars. So it has an effect. But anytime you're talking about the cedi depreciation, I'm a bit cautious though, because a large part of it is actually speculation. There are situations where people who do not even need the cedi, because we are speculating and we are talking so much about it, they go and buy dollars and go and hide. It aggravates the situation. So I'm always cautious about it.
But what is the reality? The reality out there is 4 points.
Yeah, the reality is that the cedi is depreciating, and there's no doubt about it. I also think that when we're talking cedi depreciation, we must always put it in context, because it's also a bit of a cycle. There are certain times of the year that you see the cedi depreciating because there's pressure on the cedi. Around this time, when people have started arranging for Christmas goods and all that, because we're entering the third quarter, you seem to have these tendencies.
So this was to be expected?
Not to this extent, honestly. I think last year we managed it quite well. Compared to last year, around this time, last year around this time, we didn't have a problem with the cedi depreciation. The cedi was fairly stable. So this year, if it is depreciating, then we must be concerned about that. However, we shouldn't also lose sight of the cycle, the regular cycle concerning the time that the pressures comes on the cedi. What I'm saying is that when the pressure comes on it, Bank of Ghana will have to intervene quickly so that we don't wait and then end up in speculation.
They've made quite some interventions, except that we're not feeling the impacts.
Yes.
Of that.
That's what I'm saying. If you make some interventions and the impact is not being felt, it could mean two things. It could mean that the intervention you are making is not adequate, the hole is so deep that you are not able to fill it, or people who do not even need the dollars are buying and hiding it. So it's going beyond the real demand for the dollar to speculative elements. So that's where we have to guard against. Because if we overly speculate, and it aggravates the situation, we all suffer. For industries, we even suffer more. So we're always cautious when we're dealing with this subject matter. However, you are right. The reality is that the cedi is depreciating, and we need to stem.
So when you hear the defense put up by the vice president, for instance, what do you say to that? And he is looking at the performance of the cedi against the dollar under the Mahama-led administration, and what is happening now.
Well, for me, I don't talk politics. I talk business, and I've not done the statistics. I don't have the statistics.
But do you care as business?
Yes, we do care.
Do you care that it performed a certain way under a certain administration and it's performing another way under another administration?
Normally, I prefer to discuss time periods. We could say within certain number of years, maybe between 2005 to 2010 or 2010. I prefer discussing time periods. And then when you're discussing time periods, you get certain variables to guide you as to the basis for having this. Instead of comparing administrations and regimes, it then becomes political. So I agree that you can compare time periods, and we always do that. We always do the analysis. We look at the statistics in the past and then find out what was causing it at a particular point in time. Of course, we all know that in 2014 we had the worst depreciation ever, in several decades. In 2014, if you look at the AGI Business Barometer survey, we had the worst confidence level in the whole history of the business barometer, because confidence dipped so much. One, because the cedi was depreciating at a very fast rate, and businesses could not predict So that situation, I don't think we want to encounter it again. We had never had it in the past, and in recent past we are not having it. I don't think that's what we are experiencing now.
Okay.
So if you want to compare time periods, 2014 we've had the worst ever, but it's not.
So let's talk about the confidence levels now. Then where do we stand?
I think last year we had relatively improved confidence level. There's a baseline we always measure, and anytime the confidence level is above the baseline, then it's relatively good. But then we want it to be going up and up, and for the last 3 or 4 quarters, we saw the confidence level inching up. So we were actually above the baseline. But in the first quarter of this year, it dropped, and then the second quarter it improved again. And when we do the analysis, we realize that normally we compare the last quarter of the year and then the first quarter of the ensuing year, there's always that kind of situation, because the last quarter is Christmas period, people buy more, businesses get more business and all that. But the first quarter is always a challenging period. So the first quarter it dropped. The last quarter that we did, it inched up a bit.
Okay.
It improved a bit. But in the last 4 quarters, it's all been above the baseline. And that means that, generally speaking, confidence level is not too bad. It could be better. It could be much better. We've not reached the levels we had some years back, But in recent past, I think this is the best we've had over the past 3 quarters. Yes.
Okay. But are businesses able to predict the Cedi's performance against the dollar?
I think that now it's a bit difficult, but they are able to predict within a range. The experience we had in 2014, it went beyond predictable levels. People could not predict at all, because you go to the market, the following day it's gone up and that kind of, it was hyper. This time around, people are speculating a bit, they are predicting a bit, but within a certain range, yes. I think it's depreciating, but not as fast as we experienced before. So you can have a predictable range, but it is still depreciating, and we need to find a way to stop it.
So how are businesses surviving through this?
Well, different businesses manage the situation differently. For those who are highly import dependent, those importing raw materials, it means that in pricing your product, you have to factor a bit of that element into your pricing. Because what it means is that by the time you finish, and it takes about 3-4 month cycle when you bring raw materials, process, sell, and get your money back. It takes about 3-4 month cycle. So it means that if you have imported raw materials and you know that within the next 4 months or so you are not going to pay back, you need to factor a bit of that into your costing, okay? So that you don't lose out completely, because you're going to buy dollars at a much more expensive rate than it was before, and that's a cost to you. So you need to factor that. So for those who are highly import dependent, that is how they probably have to approach it. But I must quickly add that it isn't all the case that you can always factor these cost elements into your costing, because you are living in a very competitive world. When you are increasing your price and others are not increasing theirs, then you are being competed out of the market. So if your margins are good, you have to absorb some of these costs. It means that it's a bad time for you. You probably wouldn't make any profit, but at least if you're able to break even, then you are still in business. When it gets to a point where you cannot even break even, then you have no choice than to increase the price. And the question is whether you'll be able to face the competition at the time. And for those who need the dollars badly, it becomes a bad business for them, because you have no choice than to really import your own materials. So you need to have arrangements with your banks, and the banks should be able to help you sort things out. For the relatively bigger players, they are able to manage it quite well, because they have good relationship and standing arrangement with the banks. But for small enterprises, it becomes a bit more challenging. So in situations like the SMEs even suffer the more.
It's good you talk about the banks, because we know what has happened to 7 of our own, with 5 being consolidated. If you look at the papers, they are reporting, for instance, that the president says he will not spare any person who played a part in getting us to the point where we've gotten to. Is working with the banks, particularly the indigenous banks, a lot more difficult today after the struggles?
I wouldn't say it is a lot more difficult today. AGI has always made a point that we must play by the rules. If some banks are not going by the rules and the regulations, the necessary sanctions must be applied. However, in doing so, we must also be cautious in stretching the issues, even for banks that have not been in that situation because they are indigenous banks. Then we start talking negatively about them, and it affects their business. People lose confidence and all that.
Indeed, some are your members.
Yes, yes. A lot of the banks are our members, so we are aware of it. And some are doing very well, even in these difficult times. Some are still doing quite well. So I don't see why we should overstretch it. And those who are not part of the 7 or the 5 are also being tagged as being bad men.
But of course, we've heard that there are a lot more that would, come crumbling down if they don't merge. And we've heard about talks about mergers.
No, but that's a different thing altogether. Merging is different from merging. They are probably merging to meet the minimum requirement of Bank of Ghana. That does not mean that the bank is not doing well. It's just that probably we are not meeting that minimum capital requirement. So that's different. If you are not performing well, that's also different. So if we say, oh, there are so many other banks in the pipeline that are going to go through that, until it comes out, we should be very careful.
But you have indeed heard about, people making such comments.
I hear about such comments, and I think it's an unfortunate comment. We shouldn't do that. Those that have had challenges, let's deal with it. And I'm not in any way saying that we should spare those that have had challenges. Let's deal with it. Let's find a way to solve the problems. But those that have not yet been identified as having those challenges, we should do business with them. We should have confidence in them. We should continue to invest and do business. Why should we collapse those banks if they are not in that difficulty? Because it's our own indigenous banks. And I think that the desire of every nation and all of us is to see some of our indigenous businesses growing and becoming bigger and also going elsewhere. So we shouldn't badmouth them unnecessarily. If there are genuine challenges, we have to deal with it. And those who are not going by the rules, let's deal with it. But don't let's overly stretch it and expect it.
We've had situations of panic withdrawals, and indeed, Dr. Papa Kwesi in one of the newspapers today is making comments about that. Your members, have any of them experienced that?
Yes, the panic withdrawal is happening, and it's not just at the bank level, it's also at the savings and loans and even microfinancial institutions. But I think it can only be temporary, because eventually when you withdraw, where are you going to take the money to? You need to, you can't go and be putting money under your beds. So this situation is happening because of the negative, image that the banks have today. But I think that by and large, people will realize that those who are solid, they will still stand, and therefore there will be no problem doing business with them. So panic withdrawal may have happened, but I think that we expect Bank of Ghana to also come out and give more confidence to businesses and to individuals that the banking sector is not collapsing. We shouldn't collapse it. We cannot afford to collapse it anyway. So whatever it will take to bring confidence back, we have to do it. Those who are not doing well, fine, of course, let's see how we can resolve that.
Is there any help, any support from AGI to its members, those in the financial sector, in terms of either streamlining, maybe not streamlining, but abiding or following the regulations? Because we've heard, for instance, about how the international banks, because they have bigger regulators, and sometimes the commitment is even harsher or stronger than what the Bank of Ghana would give. So they are able to meet whatever requirement there is. But with the local banks, it's almost like, oh, we are at home. Bank of Ghana is our own. So they don't take regulations serious. And that's why we're where we are with those banks that have collapsed. Do you help them in any way?
Yeah, whatever help you can give or we give is more of advisory, because we don't regulate the banks. Bank of Ghana is a regulator. And the banks are our members, and we actually appreciate the challenge that they go through. So we always so we can do advisory and then also do advocacy on their behalf. But then we are always very careful also. We don't advocate for people who are not going by the rules, because otherwise it becomes chaotic. You can't live in a country where the standards are there, the rules are there, the regulations are there, and you are flouting it. If you do that, you collapse the whole system. So even if you are a member and you don't go by the rules, we will not stand behind you and start making noise for you. But if you are you have a genuine challenge, of course the association is there to speak on your behalf, and indeed we've done that several times. That's why I'm saying that even for those who, as at now, have not been identified as having any challenge, why should we badmouth them? we should have confidence in doing business with them. And we did encourage our members to go and do business with those banks. The indigenous banks, some are very good. They are doing profitable business. They are doing genuine business. We should support them, and why not? So our support comes in different forms. It's more of advocacy and advisory. But we don't have the resources to put money in the banks if they have liquidity challenges and all that. That one, I think, is to be done at the Bank of Ghana level. But advisory and advocacy, why not? We do it.
Around this time, we're also talking about your industrial summit and exhibition. And one of the things as part of your many conversations is value addition. And so I'm curious, I want to know, what do you think about our deal with China, our bauxite deal with China, the agreement that was recently ratified by Parliament?
Well, I think that you talked about value addition, and value addition for AGI is very important to us. Most of our members are doing value addition business, and indeed, I think we just talked about Cedi depreciation. If we're adding so much value, to our products before we export and we earn in foreign exchange, and we're producing more of the products from here and not importing, it would have helped, with the Cedi situation. And so that is one area that we are always talking about, and we think is the solution to the regular depreciation of the Cedi. So value addition is important. And the China deal, well, I've not had the opportunity of, reading the entire agreement or the full document. But basically, I think that we have set up a whole organization called the GIPC to go around the world and canvass for foreign direct investment. So if you go around the world and you identify opportunities that can be brought into the country in the form of foreign direct investments, in whatever form it takes, whether it's financial, whether it's industry, whether it's construction, whether it's infrastructure, you grab it. We only say that always be careful the kind of agreement you have, so that in the long run, it's not going to be, you are not going to be at a disadvantage.
But this deal will also see us giving our raw material, to China, and getting, of course, they say it's a butter deal. That's also debatable, whether it's a loan or butter. But for now, we call it butter until the IMF says otherwise. But this will see us get infrastructure. And I'm linking it to the value addition that you talk about, because these are products, these are minerals that we could have added value if we were, doing or dealing with it ourselves. And that's why I actually put the question to you.
Yes. I understand your question. As I said, I've not studied the whole document, but I can imagine that if you are getting
on the surface,
if you are getting infrastructure, it all depends on how the deal is struck. If you get an infrastructure, and that infrastructure will propel you to do so many things, and then also if you are paying that with the raw bauxite, and it's for a certain period, and it's not forever, then it means that it's well calculated. What it means is that the infrastructure is costing you so much, quantum of money. And therefore, if you also produce the bauxite, a certain quantity will be equivalent to that money that has been given to you. After it's paid, that is the end of it. I don't think it will be a bad deal. The problem comes when the agreement is such that, you tie yourself to that arrangement, that even beyond you paying for your debt, you continue to export in raw quantities, in raw state. That one will be bad. And because I've not studied the full agreement, I don't know how it's structured. But I think if you structure it well, I don't think there will be too much problem with you paying part of the debt you have for the infrastructure you are going to have with the raw bauxite. I think it has to be looked at. But it should only be for a certain period and for specifically paying for that particular agreement you have. And beyond that, add value.